Most people think movies get made because they're great stories. I used to think that too. You write something brilliant, people read it, everyone loves it, the studio says yes. Simple, right? Except that's not how entertainment works. Because every year, thousands of screenplays are written, only a tiny fraction ever gets produced. And some of the biggest films ever made rejected multiple times before someone finally said yes. The Matrix, Star Wars, even Harry Potter was rejected by multiple studios before becoming a global phenomenon. So what separates the projects that move forward from the projects that disappear? Who actually decides that? And what are they looking at when they say a yes or a no? This is Who Decides, a 10-minute insider series where I unpack one of the most influential and least visible roles in entertainment, that of the development executive. The biggest misconception about Hollywood or Bollywood is that it is primarily a creativity-driven industry. It is creative, but it is also a capital allocation business. Every film or series represents a financial bet. When a studio greenlights a project, they're not simply choosing a story, they're choosing where to invest millions or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, which changes the entire question being asked inside the system. It is not just, is this script good? It becomes, is this the right investment right now? And those are completely different questions. Because a script can be beautifully written and still fail that second test. A project might have no clear audience, unclear marketing, high production costs, limited international appeal, poor timing within the studio slate, and suddenly even a great script becomes a risky investment. This is exactly what development executives work on a daily basis. Development executives are essentially the first major filter in studio production companies and streaming platforms. Their job isn't simply reading scripts. Their job is evaluating potential. They read scripts, source books, graphic novels, articles, listen to pitches and original ideas. And they spend much of their time asking, can this become a successful project? That means balancing creative and business considerations simultaneously. They are evaluating the story. Does it work? Audience, who is this for? Positioning, how would we sell this? Budget, how expensive is it? Talent, can we attract major actors or directors? Strategy, does this fit our slate based on everything else we have for this year? Competition, and finally risk. How likely is this to be successful? One development executive described the job less as evaluating scripts and more as evaluating packages. This is the part that surprises most people. Good scripts die all the time. Not because they are bad, because they're difficult to justify. Okay, let's imagine these two pitches. The first one is a fast-paced action movie about cars. The second is a deeply philosophical drama exploring grief and identity through the life of a retired old widow. Now here is the uncomfortable truth. The drama might be better written, might be more meaningful and even award-winning, but the film on cars might be easier to greenlit. Well, why? You understand it, kids understand it, parents, international audiences understand it. Marketing teams know how to cut a trailer, someone in distribution knows how to sell it, licensing team knows how to sell toys. The concept is instantly legible. It might even be box office worthy, even after the requirement of higher dollar amounts. Now, that does not mean it is a better script, but it might be easier to finance with the concept being low risk and high profit. That's the difference between quality and marketability. The development executives live exactly inside this tension, not choosing between good and bad stories, but between viable and non-viable projects at a given moment. Let's go deeper. This gets layered even further when budgets increase. Imagine two films, one is a $20 million drama and the other is a $120 million action spectacle. For film A, the studio may be comfortable relying heavily on North American audiences, or for Bollywood, the Indian market. For film B, that's almost impossible. At larger budgets, studios often need international revenue to justify the investment. It needs to work across multiple territories, different cultures, audience expectations. So the questions really expand here. Does this translate globally? Will audiences in Europe understand it? What about Asia? What about Latin America? Is it visually driven or dialogue dependent? Does it require cultural context to understand? This is one reason action, adventure, animation often travel more easily. Visual storytelling tends to cross borders more than dialogue heavy domestic dramas. Of course, there are exceptions, not because they are better, but because they're easier to translate across markets. So, when development executives evaluate a project, they're often thinking globally rather than locally, not because they dislike those niche segments, but because the economics change as budgets increase. Now, imagine the same script. Nothing about the writing or concept changes, except one thing. An A-list director attaches or a major star joins. Suddenly, the risk profile changes. The budget might even be higher now. The entire perception of the project changes because now there is another question. Is this script and talent combination a safe enough bet? Is it a definite box office? For example, if a project attaches someone like Ariana Grande, after Wicked, the perceived audience awareness shifts immediately. The same script now feels more visible, more bankable, more globally recognized. Or if a filmmaker like John M. Chu, who directed Crazy Rich Asians and Wicked, is attached, studios evaluate differently because of proven scale and execution. Nothing about the script has changed, but the perceived probability of success has changed. However, the opposite is also true. If there's a mismatch between expectation and genre, the perceived risk can increase. For example, if a filmmaker known for romantic or feel-good storytelling suddenly takes on a dark horror film, studios may pause, not because it cannot work, but because there is no clear precedent for how the combination will perform. The same applies in other industries too. In Bollywood, if someone like Karan Johar, known for large-scale romantic dramas and glossy storytelling, were to suddenly direct a thriller, the question wouldn't just be about the script. It would be about the fit, tone, and audience expectation. Because in development, even strong names do not automatically reduce risk. They change how risk is being evaluated, and that is the key idea. The Matrix is one of my favorite examples of all time. Today, it feels obvious. Of course, The Matrix should have been made. Of course, audiences would love it, and of course, it became so iconic. But that's the hindsight. At the time, Warner Brothers was considering roughly a $60 million science fiction film from relatively inexperienced directors using visual techniques that had not really been proven before. The world of sci-fi had not yet demonstrated a consistent, bankable audience at scale. That sounds a lot riskier. The Wachowskis had supporters inside Warner Brothers, but the project was still considered a major gamble. To help convince the studio, they famously created hundreds of pages of storyboards demonstrating exactly how the film would work visually. What changed by pushing it a couple of years? Not necessarily the core idea, but the surroundings changed. The filmmakers gained credibility, the visions became clearer, they got time to test and develop an audience base for it, the studio became more confident, and the risk became a bit more easier to justify. And eventually, someone inside the system decided this is worth taking a chance on. Even in Indian cinema, we see the same pattern. Projects like Bahubali were not just big movies, they were uncertain bets before the release. That is exactly why I find development fascinating, because it sits at the intersection of creativity and probability. Most audiences only see the final film, but long before decisions were being made about risk, timing, audience, and viability. Development executives are not doing or deciding whether a story is beautiful. They're deciding whether a company should bet millions of dollars on it. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they miss, sometimes they reject the next Matrix, sometimes they discover it. But every movie you have ever seen passed through some version of the process. Someone had to believe the opportunity outweighed the uncertainty. Most people think entertainment is a creativity business, but it is also a probability business. The stories we watch are not just the stories that were written. They're the stories that survived the system.